Have you ever felt like you're drowning in your own fears? Like every shadow holds a threat, every unknown carries danger, and every tomorrow brings anxiety that steals your sleep tonight? You're not alone in this struggle, and more importantly, you're not meant to carry this burden by yourself. Fear has become the silent epidemic of our generation. It whispers lies in our ears during the quiet moments, telling us we're not safe, we're not protected, we're not loved. But what if I told you there's a truth so powerful, so transformative, that it can shatter every chain of fear that's been holding you captive? What if the very thing you've been searching for has been calling your name all along? My name is here to walk with you through this journey, and I've spent years studying how God's perfect love casts out fear, not just as a nice religious saying, but as a living, breathing reality that changes everything about how we face our darkest moments. In this video, I'm going to reveal 3 profound truths about God's love that will revolutionize how you handle fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. These aren't just feel-good concepts or wishful thinking. These are battle-tested principles that have transformed millions of lives throughout history, and they're about to transform yours. But before we dive deep into these life-changing truths, let me share something with you that might surprise you. The most courageous people in history, the ones we admire for their bravery and strength, weren't fearless. They were afraid, just like you and me. The difference wasn't that they didn't feel fear. The difference was they had discovered something bigger than their fear. They had encountered a love so vast, so unshakable, so absolutely certain that it became their anchor in every storm. You clicked on this video for a reason. Maybe you're facing something that terrifies you right now. Maybe you're tired of being controlled by anxiety about the future. Maybe you've been searching for peace but finding only more questions, more doubt, more sleepless nights, wondering if you're truly safe in this unpredictable world. I want you to know that your search ends here, not because I have all the answers, but because I know the one who does. Here's what we're going to uncover together. First, I'll show you the shocking truth about why most people's attempts to overcome fear actually make it stronger. Then we'll explore the scientific and spiritual reality of how perfect love literally rewires your brain's fear response. Finally, I'll walk you through the 3-step process that allows God's love to become your fortress against every anxiety, worry, and paralyzing fear you face. And listen, I need to be completely honest with you about something. What I'm about to share isn't just theory for me. 3 years ago, I was trapped in a cycle of fear so intense that I couldn't leave my house without panic attacks. I was afraid of failing, afraid of rejection, afraid of being alone, afraid of not being enough. The fear was so overwhelming that it nearly destroyed my relationships, my career, and my faith. I tried everything: therapy, medication, self-help books, meditation, positive thinking. Some helped temporarily, but the fear always came back stronger than before. Then something happened that changed everything. I discovered what it truly means to be held by a love that never fails, never leaves, and never gives up. Not just knowing it in my head, but experiencing it in the deepest parts of my soul. And when that perfect love took root in my heart, something miraculous happened. The fears that had controlled me for years began to lose their power. Not all at once, but day by day, moment by moment, I found myself walking in a freedom I never thought possible. Now, I want to be clear about something important. This isn't about pretending fear doesn't exist or putting on a fake smile when you're struggling. This isn't about toxic positivity or denying real problems in your life. What I'm talking about is far more powerful than that. I'm talking about discovering an unshakable foundation that remains solid even when everything around you is falling apart. You see, most people approach fear backwards. They try to fight it, suppress it, or reason their way out of it. But here's the problem with that approach. Fear isn't primarily a thinking problem. It's a love problem. When we don't feel truly, completely, unconditionally loved, fear rushes in to fill that void. We become afraid because deep down, we're not sure we're safe. We're not sure we're protected. We're not sure someone powerful enough to handle our problems actually cares about us personally. But what happens when you encounter a love so perfect, so complete, so utterly reliable, that it drives out every shadow of doubt about your safety and security? What happens when you realize that the creator of the universe, the one who holds all power in his hands, is not just aware of your struggles, but is actively working for your good in every situation? Everything changes. The Apostle John wrote something that has echoed through centuries and changed countless lives. He said that perfect love casts out fear, not covers it up, not manages it, not learns to live with it, casts it out, completely removes it, makes it powerless. But here's the key that most people miss. It's not our love that casts out fear. It's being perfectly loved that does it. Think about it this way. A child who knows beyond any doubt that their parents love them unconditionally doesn't lie awake at night worried about being abandoned. They don't question whether they'll be provided for or protected. They rest in the security of that love. Even when storms come, even when things get difficult, they know they're held by something bigger than their circumstances. That's exactly what God's love offers you, but infinitely more. Because human love, no matter how strong, has limitations. Parents get tired, friends let us down, relationships change, people leave. But God's love is different. It's perfect, which means it has no flaws, no conditions, no expiration date, and no limits. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, that sounds nice, but how do I actually experience this love? How do I move from just believing it exists to actually feeling safe and secure in it? That's exactly what the rest of this video is about. I'm going to walk you through the practical, step-by-step process of allowing God's perfect love to transform your relationship with fear. But first, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah contacted me 6 months ago, completely overwhelmed by anxiety about her future. She had just graduated college and was paralyzed by fear about making the wrong career choice, about not being good enough, about disappointing everyone who believed in her. She described feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no safety net, terrified to take any step forward because she might fall. Sarah had grown up in church, knew all the right answers about God's love, but somehow those truths felt distant and theoretical when she was lying awake at 3 a.m. with her heart racing. She needed something more than just knowing about God's love. She needed to experience it in a way that would actually change how she felt and how she lived. Over the next several months, as Sarah learned to apply the principles I'm about to share with you, something beautiful happened. The paralyzing anxiety that had controlled her decisions began to loosen its grip. She started making choices from a place of peace instead of panic. She found herself sleeping better, relating to others with more confidence, and facing challenges with a quiet strength she'd never experienced before. The transformation wasn't instant, and it wasn't about never feeling afraid again. It was about having something stronger than fear to anchor her life to. When worries came, and they still did, she had learned how to run to a place of safety that never failed her. She had discovered what it means to be held by perfect love. This is what I want for you. Not a life without challenges, but a life where challenges don't define you. Not a life without difficult emotions, but a life where those emotions don't control you. A life where you know, beyond any shadow of doubt, that you are completely safe in the hands of one who loves you perfectly. So how does this actually work? How does God's love specifically address the fears that keep you up at night? How does it change the way you think, feel, and respond to the uncertainties of life? The answer lies in understanding 3 fundamental truths about the nature of perfect love and how it operates in your life. The first truth is this: perfect love is not based on your performance. This might be the most revolutionary concept you encounter today, especially if you've spent your life trying to earn love, approval, and security through what you do. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that love is conditional, that we have to be good enough, smart enough, strong enough, or successful enough to deserve it. But God's love operates on an entirely different principle. It's not attracted to you because of your strengths or repelled by your weaknesses. It's not dependent on your good days or diminished by your bad ones. It simply is, as constant and reliable as the sunrise, as unchanging as gravity itself. When you truly grasp this truth, something shifts in your relationship with fear. So many of our deepest anxieties are rooted in the terror of not being enough, of being found out, of being rejected or abandoned when people see who we really are. But perfect love says, I see all of you, I know all of you, and I love all of you completely. There's nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to earn. Imagine what your life would look like if you never had to wonder whether you were truly accepted. Picture waking up each morning with the deep, settled knowledge that your worth isn't up for debate, your value isn't in question, and your place in this world is absolutely secure. That's what perfect love offers you, and it's the foundation for conquering every fear that's been holding you back. But here's where it gets even more powerful. The second truth about God's perfect love is that it's not passive. It's not just a warm feeling or a nice sentiment that makes you feel better temporarily. Perfect love is active, protective, and incredibly powerful. It doesn't just tell you that you're safe. It actively works to ensure your safety, your provision, and your ultimate good in every situation you face. Think about the most protective love you've ever witnessed. Maybe it was a parent rushing to defend their child, or someone you know who would literally move mountains for the people they care about. Now multiply that intensity by infinity, and you're beginning to understand the kind of love that surrounds you right now. This isn't a distant cosmic force that occasionally pays attention to your problems. This is intimate, personal, moment-by-moment care from someone who has both the desire and the power to handle anything that threatens your peace. When fear whispers that you're alone in your struggles, perfect love speaks louder, reminding you that you have an advocate who never sleeps, never gets distracted, and never runs out of resources to help you. When anxiety tries to convince you that your problems are too big or too complex for anyone to solve, perfect love points to a track record of impossible situations being transformed, of dead ends becoming doorways, of what seemed like disasters becoming the setup for miracles. I want to share with you something that happened to me just last month that perfectly illustrates this principle. I was facing a situation that felt completely hopeless. A financial crisis that threatened everything I'd worked for, combined with a health scare that had me questioning my future. The fear was so intense that I could barely function. Every scenario I imagined ended in catastrophe, and I felt like I was spiraling into a darkness I might never escape. But in the middle of that storm, I remembered something crucial. I remembered that perfect love isn't just concerned with my feelings. It's actively working behind the scenes, orchestrating solutions I can't see, opening doors I don't even know exist, and preparing breakthrough moments that will leave me amazed at how perfectly everything worked out. Not because I deserved it, not because I figured out the right formula, but simply because that's what perfect love does. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched in wonder as situation after situation resolved in ways I never could have planned or predicted. The financial crisis became an opportunity for a better business partnership. The health scare led to discovering an issue early enough to address it completely. What had looked like the end became a new beginning that was better than anything I could have imagined. This is what active, perfect love looks like in real life. It doesn't promise that you'll never face difficulties, but it guarantees that you'll never face them alone, and that every single challenge will ultimately work for your good. When you really believe this, When it becomes more real to you than your circumstances, fear loses its grip on your life because you know that someone infinitely more powerful than your problems is personally invested in your success and well-being. The third truth about God's perfect love might be the most practical of all, and it's this. Perfect love gives you access to perfect wisdom for every decision you need to make. So much of our fear comes from not knowing what to do next, from feeling like we have to navigate life's complexities with limited information and no guarantee that we're making the right choices. But here's what changes everything. Perfect love doesn't just care about you, it also knows everything, every possible outcome, every hidden variable, every consequence of every choice you could make. And this perfect wisdom is available to guide you through every decision, every relationship, every opportunity, and every challenge you'll ever face. This means you never have to be paralyzed by indecision again. You never have to lie awake wondering if you're making a terrible mistake. You never have to carry the crushing weight of trying to control outcomes you can't possibly predict or manage. Instead, you can make decisions from a place of peace, knowing that you have access to guidance that sees the whole picture when you can only see a small piece. Let me tell you about David, a friend of mine who was offered 2 job opportunities at exactly the same time. On paper, one was clearly better, more money, better benefits, impressive title, everything he thought he wanted. The other seemed risky, uncertain, with a company that was just starting out and couldn't offer nearly as much security or prestige. David was tormented by the decision. He made lists, asked everyone's opinion, analyzed every possible angle, but the fear of making the wrong choice was eating him alive. He was afraid that if he took the safe job, he'd miss out on something amazing. But he was equally afraid that if he took the risky job, he'd destroy his career and disappoint his family. Then David learned to do something that changed everything. Instead of trying to figure out the perfect choice through human wisdom alone, he learned to tap into perfect love's perfect knowledge. He stopped trying to control the outcome and started asking for guidance from someone who could see the end from the beginning. The answer came with a peace that surprised him. Not through a dramatic revelation or mystical experience, but through a quiet, settled knowing that felt more solid than all his fears and doubts combined. He took the risky job, the one that didn't make sense on paper, and within 2 years it had led to opportunities he never could have imagined with the safe choice. But here's the beautiful part. David told me later that even if things had gone differently, even if the job hadn't worked out the way it did, he would have had peace because he knew his decision was guided by perfect love. He was no longer carrying the impossible burden of trying to guarantee outcomes. He was simply following the wisdom of someone who loved him perfectly and could see perfectly. This is available to you right now, in whatever situation is causing you fear or anxiety. You don't have to figure everything out on your own. You don't have to carry the weight of making perfect decisions with imperfect information. Perfect love wants to guide you step by step, decision by decision, into a future that's better than anything you could plan for yourself. Now, I want to address something that might be running through your mind right now. You might be thinking, this all sounds wonderful, but how do I actually access this perfect love? How do I move from understanding these concepts to experiencing them in a way that actually changes how I feel and live? That's exactly what we need to talk about next, because knowing about perfect love and experiencing perfect love are 2 completely different things. You can believe that God loves you without ever feeling safe in that love. You can understand that He's powerful without ever experiencing His protection in your daily life. You can know that He has wisdom without ever receiving the guidance you need for the decisions you're facing. The difference between knowing and experiencing comes down to one crucial element: trust. But not the kind of trust that most people think about. Not the trust that says, I'll believe this if I see proof, or I'll rely on this if it never fails me. That kind of trust is really just another form of fear. because it's always looking for reasons to doubt, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The trust that unlocks perfect love's power in your life is different. It's the trust that says, even when I can't see how this is going to work out, even when my circumstances look impossible, even when my feelings are screaming that I'm not safe, I'm going to anchor my life to what I know is true about perfect love rather than what I feel in this moment. This kind of trust isn't naive or foolish. It's actually the most rational response you can have when you understand who God really is and how His love really works. When you know that someone with unlimited power and unlimited knowledge loves you with unlimited commitment, the logical thing to do is to trust Him completely even when you can't understand what He's doing. But trust like this doesn't usually happen overnight, especially if you've been hurt or disappointed before. It grows as you begin to test perfect love in small ways and discover that it really is as reliable as it claims to be. It develops as you start choosing to believe what God says about you instead of what your fears say about you. It strengthens as you begin to see evidence of His active care in your daily life in ways both big and small. Here's how this process works practically. Instead of trying to work up enough faith to trust God with everything all at once, you start by trusting Him with one thing, one fear, one worry, one decision, one relationship. You take that specific concern and you deliberately choose to believe that perfect love is bigger than that problem and actively working to resolve it for your good. Then you watch what happens. Not with the skeptical watching of someone looking for proof, but with the expectant watching of someone who knows they're about to see love in action. You pay attention to how things unfold, to the doors that open, to the peace that comes, to the solutions that appear, to the strength that shows up right when you need it. As you see perfect love prove itself trustworthy in small things, your capacity to trust it with bigger things grows naturally. What once seemed impossible to believe becomes the most natural thing in the world. What once felt risky becomes the safest place you could possibly be. And here's what happens to fear in this process. It doesn't disappear because you've become brave. It disappears because you found something so much stronger and more reliable than fear, that fear simply has no power over you anymore. You're not fighting fear. You're anchored to something fear cannot touch, cannot shake, and cannot destroy. This is the secret that has sustained believers through persecution, through loss, through suffering, through uncertainty, and through every imaginable trial for thousands of years. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of perfect love that makes them absolutely secure no matter what they face. This is what I want you to understand about the journey you're on right now. You didn't stumble onto this video by accident. You weren't randomly scrolling when something compelled you to click. Deep in your heart, you've been searching for exactly what we're talking about. Your soul has been crying out for the security that only perfect love can provide. And that cry has been heard. But here's where most people get stuck. And I need to warn you about this because it could derail everything we've talked about. They hear about God's perfect love, they get excited about the possibility of freedom from fear, and then they make one critical mistake. They try to earn it. Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this could save you years of frustration and disappointment. You cannot earn perfect love through good behavior. You cannot qualify for it through religious activities. You cannot make yourself worthy of it through trying harder, being better, or doing more. Perfect love is a gift, not a reward. It's freely given, not carefully earned. I learned this the hard way during my own journey with fear. After that initial breakthrough I mentioned earlier, I fell into a trap that almost destroyed my progress. I started thinking that God's love and protection were somehow connected to my performance. When I had good days, when I prayed more, when I read my Bible consistently, when I served others, I felt secure in His love. But when I struggled, when I failed, when I felt distant from God, the fear would come rushing back with a vengeance. I was living on an emotional roller coaster, and I couldn't understand why. I had experienced the reality of perfect love, but I was still being controlled by fear on a regular basis. The problem wasn't that God's love had changed or diminished. The problem was that I was trying to maintain my connection to that love through my own efforts instead of simply receiving it as the gift it had always been. Everything shifted when I realized that perfect love isn't something I have to maintain. It's something that maintains me. It's not dependent on my consistency, my understanding, or my spiritual maturity. It simply is, as constant and reliable as God Himself, because it flows directly from His character, not from my performance. This revelation changed everything about how I approached my relationship with fear. Instead of trying to be good enough to deserve God's protection, I learned to rest in the truth that His protection was already mine because His love was already mine. Instead of working to earn His guidance, I discovered that His wisdom was constantly available to me because I was constantly loved by Him. When you grasp this truth, really grasp it, something profound happens in your nervous system. The constant vigilance that fear requires begins to relax. The exhausting effort of trying to control outcomes starts to fade. The crushing weight of feeling responsible for everything begins to lift. You start to live from a place of rest instead of striving, from peace instead of panic, from trust instead of terror. But I want to be honest with you about something else. Even when you understand these truths intellectually, there will still be moments when fear tries to reassert its control over your life. There will still be situations that trigger your old patterns of thinking and feeling. There will still be times when your emotions seem louder than your faith, when your circumstances seem bigger than God's promises. This is completely normal, and it doesn't mean you're failing or that perfect love isn't working in your life. It means you're human, and humans need reminders. We need to be brought back to truth again and again until that truth becomes more real to us than anything else we experience. Think about it this way. If you've been afraid for years, if fear has been your default response to uncertainty and challenge, your brain has literally been wired to expect danger, to assume the worst, to prepare for catastrophe. Those neural pathways don't disappear overnight just because you've learned about perfect love. They need to be rewired through practice, through repeatedly choosing to believe truth instead of fear, through consistently running to love instead of anxiety. This is why the journey from fear to faith is exactly that, a journey. It's not a one-time decision or a single moment of breakthrough, though those moments are certainly part of it. It's a daily, sometimes moment-by-moment choice to anchor your life to perfect love instead of imperfect circumstances. Let me share with you the 3 practical steps that have made all the difference in my own journey and in the lives of countless others who have discovered the freedom that perfect love brings. These aren't complicated formulas or mystical techniques. They're simple, practical ways to train your heart and mind to run to love instead of fear when life gets overwhelming. The first step is what I call the reality check. When fear starts to rise, when anxiety begins to grip your heart, when worry threatens to steal your peace, you stop everything and ask yourself one simple question. What is true right now about perfect love? Not what you feel, not what your circumstances suggest, not what other people are saying, but what is actually true about the love that surrounds you in this very moment. The truth is that you are completely known and completely loved. The truth is that someone with unlimited power is actively working for your good. The truth is that you have access to perfect wisdom for whatever decision you're facing. The truth is that your future is in the hands of someone who loves you more than you love yourself and who has resources you can't even imagine. When you deliberately focus your mind on these truths instead of on your fears, something powerful happens. Your nervous system begins to calm down. Your perspective starts to shift. The situation that seemed overwhelming moments ago begins to look manageable again. Not because it's changed, but because you've remembered who's in control of it. The second step is what I call the trust transfer. This is where you take whatever you're afraid of and you consciously, deliberately place it into the hands of perfect love. You say something like, God, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I know you do. I don't have the power to control this situation, but I know you do. I'm afraid, but I'm choosing to trust your love for me more than I trust my fear about this. This isn't about pretending you're not afraid or forcing yourself to feel peaceful. It's about making a decision with your will that's independent of your emotions. It's about choosing to bet your life on perfect love, even when perfect love doesn't feel real to you in the moment. Here's what's amazing about this step. You don't have to feel trust in order to do trust. You don't have to feel peaceful in order to choose peace. You don't have to feel safe in order to act from safety. Trust is a decision, not a feeling. And every time you make that decision, you're strengthening your capacity to live from love instead of fear. The third step is what I call the gratitude shift. After you've reminded yourself of what's true about perfect love, and after you've transferred your concerns to God, you begin to thank Him for how He's going to work this situation out for your good. Not because you know the details of how He'll do it, but because you know His character guarantees that He will. You thank Him for His love that never fails. You thank Him for His power that never runs out. You thank Him for His wisdom that never makes mistakes. You thank Him for His timing that's always perfect, even when it doesn't match your timeline. You thank Him for caring about you personally, intimately, completely. This gratitude isn't about positive thinking or trying to manipulate God into giving you what you want. It's about aligning your heart with the reality of who He is and how He feels about you. It's about training yourself to see His goodness even before you see His solutions. When you practice these 3 steps consistently, something remarkable begins to happen. The time between feeling fear and remembering perfect love gets shorter and shorter. The grip that anxiety has on your heart gets weaker and weaker. The peace that comes from knowing you're completely safe in God's love becomes more and more natural to you. I want to tell you about Maria, a woman who attended one of my workshops 6 months ago. Maria had been struggling with severe anxiety about her teenage son, who had been making dangerous choices and running with the wrong crowd. Every night, she would lie awake imagining all the terrible things that could happen to him. Every phone call made her heart race, wondering if this was the call every parent dreads. Maria had tried everything. She had pleaded with her son, threatened him, bribed him, grounded him, gotten him counseling, and even considered sending him to live with relatives in another state. Nothing seemed to work, and her fear was consuming her life. She was snapping at her husband, neglecting her other children, and making herself sick with worry. When Maria learned these 3 steps, she was skeptical. She said, "How can thinking different thoughts possibly change my son's behavior?" But she was desperate enough to try anything, so she committed to practicing them every time fear about her son started to overwhelm her. The first few times were difficult. Her emotions were so strong that the truths about perfect love felt distant and theoretical. But she kept practicing, kept choosing to trust, kept thanking God for His love for her son, even when she couldn't see any evidence of change. Gradually, something began to shift, not in her son's behavior at first, but in Maria's heart. She found herself sleeping better. She stopped jumping every time the phone rang. She began to relate to her husband and other children with more patience and presence. The crushing weight of feeling responsible for her son's choices began to lift as she remembered that God loved her son even more than she did and was working in ways she couldn't see. Then, about 3 months later, something unexpected happened. Her son came to her and said, "Mum, I've been watching you and you seem different. You're not freaking out about me all the time anymore. Why?" That conversation became the beginning of the breakthrough she had been praying for. Her son began to open up about his struggles, began to accept help, and slowly began to make better choices. Maria told me later that she believes her son's transformation began when her own transformation began. When she stopped living in fear about him and started living in trust about God's love for both of them, something shifted in the spiritual atmosphere of their home. Her peace became contagious. Her faith became a magnet that drew her son toward the very things she had been trying to force him toward through fear and control. This is the power of perfect love in action. It doesn't just change how you feel. It changes the entire environment around you. When you stop being controlled by fear, you stop trying to control others through fear. When you start living from a place of security in God's love, you create space for others to encounter that same love. But here's what I want you to understand about Maria's story and about your own journey. The transformation didn't happen because Maria learned the right technique or found the perfect formula. It happened because she encountered perfect love and allowed that love to change how she saw her situation, how she saw her son, and how she saw God's involvement in their lives. Perfect love didn't solve Maria's problems by making them disappear. It solved them by giving her the strength, wisdom, and peace to navigate them from a completely different place. Instead of reacting from fear, she learned to respond from faith. Instead of trying to control outcomes, she learned to trust the one who was already in control. This is what perfect love wants to do in your life right now. It wants to give you a completely different way of approaching whatever is causing you fear. It wants to show you that you're not alone in your struggles, that you're not responsible for outcomes you can't control, and that you have access to resources that are infinitely greater than your problems. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but my situation is different. My fears are more complex, my problems are more serious, my circumstances are more difficult than what you're describing. And you might be right about the complexity and seriousness of what you're facing, but you're wrong if you think that makes you an exception to perfect love's power. Perfect love isn't intimidated by the size of your problems. It isn't confused by the complexity of your circumstances. It isn't overwhelmed by the intensity of your fears. Perfect love is perfect precisely because it's bigger than anything you could ever face, wiser than any situation you could encounter, and stronger than any force that could oppose you. The same love that has sustained people through persecution, poverty, illness, loss, betrayal, and every imaginable hardship throughout history is available to you right now. The same power that has turned hopeless situations into testimonies of God's faithfulness is at work in your life today. The same wisdom that has guided believers through impossible decisions and dangerous circumstances is ready to guide you through whatever you're facing. But accessing this love, power, and wisdom requires something that goes against every instinct fear has taught you. It requires you to stop trying to figure everything out on your own and start trusting someone else to handle what you cannot handle. It requires you to stop trying to control outcomes and start surrendering to the one who already controls them. It requires you to stop living as if you're alone in your struggles and start living as if you're completely supported by perfect love. This surrender isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength you could ever discover. It's not giving up. It's finally getting the help you've always needed. It's not admitting defeat. It's acknowledging that you were never meant to fight your battles alone in the first place. When you make this shift, when you move from trying to trusting, everything about your relationship with fear changes. Fear loses its power over you because you're no longer depending on your own limited resources to protect yourself. You're resting in the unlimited resources of perfect love, and perfect love has never failed to take care of those who trust in it. I want to share with you something that happened just 2 weeks ago that perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about. I received a message from a woman named Jennifer who had been following these principles for about 4 months. She told me that she had been terrified of public speaking her entire life. Not just nervous or uncomfortable, but genuinely terrified to the point where she would physically shake, lose sleep for days before any presentation, and had actually turned down job promotions because they required speaking in front of groups. Jennifer had tried everything. She had taken public speaking classes, practiced meditation, even tried medication to calm her nerves. Nothing worked because she was approaching the problem from the wrong angle. She was trying to fix her fear instead of discovering what was bigger than her fear. But then Jennifer learned something that changed everything. She discovered that perfect love wasn't just a concept to believe in during quiet moments of prayer. It was a living reality that could transform the most paralyzing situations of her life. She realized that the same love that created the universe was personally invested in her success, that the same power that spoke galaxies into existence was available to give her strength in a conference room. The breakthrough came when Jennifer had to give a presentation to her company's board of directors. Instead of spending the week before in her usual pattern of panic and preparation, she spent it practicing something entirely different. Every time fear tried to flood her mind with images of failure and humiliation, she would stop and remind herself of what was true about perfect love. She would say things like, "The one who loves me perfectly has given me something valuable to share with these people. The one who knows me completely believes I can do this. The one who has all power is with me in that room, and he wants me to succeed even more than I do." Instead of rehearsing disaster scenarios, she began rehearsing the truth about who she was and what that meant for her situation. When the day came, Jennifer told me something incredible happened. She still felt nervous, but underneath the nervousness was something she had never experienced before. A deep, settled knowing that she was not alone in that room. A quiet confidence that came not from believing in herself, but from knowing she was completely loved and supported by someone infinitely more powerful than her fears. The presentation was a success. But that's not even the most important part of the story. The most important part is what Jennifer discovered about the nature of perfect love. She learned that it doesn't just comfort you when you're afraid. It actually empowers you to do things you never thought possible when you're anchored to something bigger than your limitations. 6 months later, Jennifer has been promoted twice. She regularly speaks at conferences in her industry. She's become known as someone who brings a unique peace and confidence to high-pressure situations. But she'll be the first to tell you that the transformation wasn't about overcoming fear through willpower or positive thinking. It was about discovering that perfect love is not just an abstract theological concept, but a practical reality that changes how you show up in the world. This is what I want you to understand about your own situation. Whatever you're afraid of right now, whatever is keeping you awake at night or making your stomach churn with anxiety, you don't have to face it with just your own strength, wisdom, and resources. You have access to perfect love, and perfect love has never encountered a situation it couldn't handle, a problem it couldn't solve, or a person it couldn't transform. But here's where most people get stuck. And I need to address this directly because it could be the very thing that keeps you from experiencing the breakthrough you're looking for. They hear about God's love, they get excited about the possibility of freedom from fear, and then they wait for some dramatic emotional experience to prove that it's real. They think that perfect love will feel like a constant warm glow, that trusting God will eliminate all uncertainty, that walking in faith will mean never having another anxious thought. When they don't experience this kind of dramatic emotional shift immediately, they conclude that either God's love isn't real or it's not available to them personally. Let me tell you something that could save you months or even years of unnecessary struggle. Perfect love is not primarily about feelings, it's about facts. It's not mainly about what you experience emotionally, it's about what's true spiritually. God's love for you is not dependent on whether you feel it at any given moment. Your safety in His care is not determined by whether you feel safe. Think about it this way: gravity doesn't stop working when you don't think about it. The sun doesn't stop shining when clouds block your view of it. Your heart doesn't stop beating when you're not paying attention to it. These realities operate independently of your awareness or feelings about them. Perfect love works the same way. God's love for you is operating right now, whether you feel it or not. His protection over you is active at this very moment, whether you sense it or not. His plans for your good are unfolding in your life today, whether you can see them or not. These are not feelings to be summoned or experiences to be manufactured. These are facts to be believed and lived from. This is why the journey from fear to faith is so much more about what you choose to believe than what you happen to feel. Your emotions are important, and God cares about them deeply, but they're not the foundation of your security. Perfect love is the foundation, and perfect love remains constant, even when your emotions are all over the place. I learned this lesson in a very personal way about 2 years ago, when I was going through one of the darkest seasons of my life. Everything seemed to be falling apart at once. I was dealing with serious health issues, financial problems that seemed insurmountable, and relationship conflicts that were breaking my heart. To make matters worse, I wasn't feeling God's presence or love in any tangible way. For weeks, I felt spiritually dry, emotionally numb, and completely alone. I prayed, but the prayers felt like they were bouncing off the ceiling. I read scripture, but the words seemed flat and lifeless. I attended church, but felt disconnected from everything happening around me. My feelings were telling me that God had abandoned me, that His love was conditional after all, and that I was on my own to figure out my problems. But then, something remarkable happened. In the middle of this emotional desert, I made a decision that changed everything. I decided that I was going to believe what I knew to be true about God's love, regardless of what I felt about it. I was going to act from the truth of His character rather than from the instability of my emotions. I started each day by declaring what I knew to be true, even when it felt like I was lying to myself. I would say, God loves me perfectly today, whether I feel it or not. God is working for my good today, whether I can see it or not. God has not abandoned me today, whether I sense His presence or not. At first, these declarations felt hollow and forced, but I kept making them because I knew they were based on truth, not feelings. Gradually, something began to shift, not in my circumstances, which remained difficult, and not even in my emotions, which were still up and down. What shifted was something deeper, my foundation, my anchor, the bedrock of my identity and security. I was learning to live from what was true rather than from what felt true, and that made all the difference. Over the following months, every single one of those problems was resolved in ways I never could have imagined. The health issues led to discovering an underlying condition that, once treated, gave me more energy than I'd had in years. The financial problems became the catalyst for a career change that doubled my income. The relationship conflicts resulted in deeper, more honest connections than I'd ever experienced before. But here's the key insight from that experience. The breakthrough didn't come because I felt God's love more intensely. It came because I learned to live from the reality of God's love, regardless of how intensely I felt it. I discovered that perfect love is not a feeling to be summoned, but a foundation to be built upon. This is what I want you to understand about your own journey. You don't need to work up more faith or generate stronger feelings or have more dramatic spiritual experiences. You need to start living from what you already know to be true about perfect love, even when that truth doesn't feel real to you in the moment. When fear starts to rise, you don't need to feel brave. You need to remember that perfect love has made you safe. When anxiety threatens to overwhelm you, you don't need to feel peaceful. You need to rest in the truth that perfect love is in control of your situation. When uncertainty about the future makes you want to panic, you don't need to feel confident. You need to trust that perfect love has already prepared good things for you. This is what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. It's not about pretending your problems don't exist or forcing yourself to feel happy when you're struggling. It's about anchoring your life to what's eternally true, rather than to what's temporarily visible. Now let me address something that might be troubling some of you right now. You might be thinking, this sounds like I'm supposed to just ignore my feelings and pretend everything is fine. That's not what I'm saying at all. Your feelings matter enormously to God, and they should matter to you too. Perfect love doesn't dismiss your emotions. It provides a safe place for you to experience them without being controlled by them. When you're anchored to perfect love, you can feel afraid without being paralyzed by fear. You can experience sadness without being consumed by despair. You can face uncertainty without being driven to panic. Your emotions become messengers that give you information about your internal state, but they don't become dictators that control your choices and responses. Think about a child who gets scared during a thunderstorm but runs to their parents' arms. The child doesn't stop feeling afraid just because they're with their parent, but the fear doesn't control them anymore because they know they're safe. They can experience the emotion without being overwhelmed by it, because they're held by something stronger than what they're feeling. That's exactly what perfect love offers you. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but a safe place to experience them. Not the elimination of challenging circumstances, but the security of knowing you're not facing them alone. Not the promise that life will be easy, but the guarantee that you'll never be without the resources you need to handle whatever comes your way. This understanding transforms how you relate to every area of your life where fear has been controlling you. Take relationships, for example. So many people are afraid of being hurt, rejected, or abandoned that they either avoid deep connections altogether or they try to control others to guarantee they won't be left. But when you know you're perfectly loved by God, you can love others freely, without needing them to be perfect or to never let you down. You can be vulnerable without being desperate. You can invest in relationships without being possessive. You can care deeply without being controlling, because your fundamental need for love and security is already met. You're free to love others from abundance rather than from need. Or consider your career and finances. When you're not sure you're truly provided for, every economic uncertainty becomes a threat to your survival. You either become paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice, or you become driven by anxiety to work constantly and accumulate as much as possible. But when you know you're cared for by someone with unlimited resources, you can make decisions from wisdom rather than from panic. You can take appropriate risks without being reckless. You can work hard without being driven. You can be generous without being foolish. Because you know your ultimate security doesn't depend on your bank account or your job performance, you're free to steward your resources and abilities in ways that reflect trust rather than fear. The same principle applies to your health, your future, your children, your dreams, and every other area where fear might be holding you back. Perfect love doesn't promise you'll never face challenges in these areas, but it does promise you'll never face them without divine support, wisdom, and provision. I want to share with you one more story that illustrates the practical power of these truths. Last year, I met a man named Robert at one of my speaking events. Robert was in his 50s and had been struggling with intense anxiety about his aging parents. His father had been diagnosed with dementia, and his mother was trying to care for him at home despite her own health issues. Robert lived 3 hours away and was tormented by guilt about not being able to help more. He was also terrified about what would happen as his parents' conditions worsened. Every phone call from his mother sent him into a spiral of worry. He was losing sleep, having panic attacks, and his own family was suffering because he was so consumed with anxiety about his parents. Robert had grown up in a Christian home and had always believed in God's love intellectually, but he had never learned how to let that love actually govern his emotional responses to crisis situations. He was trying to handle his parents' situation with his own limited resources, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing him. When Robert heard about the practical reality of perfect love, something clicked for him. He realized that God loved his parents even more than he did, and was far more capable of caring for them than Robert could ever be. This didn't mean Robert should stop helping or caring. It meant he could help and care from a place of peace rather than panic. Robert began practicing what I call loving stewardship instead of anxious control. He did everything he reasonably could to support his parents, but he stopped trying to carry the impossible burden of being responsible for outcomes he couldn't control. When worry about his parents would start to consume his thoughts, he would deliberately transfer that concern to perfect love, trusting that God was actively working in ways Robert couldn't see or understand. The transformation was remarkable. Robert's anxiety levels dropped significantly, which allowed him to think more clearly and actually be more helpful to his parents. He discovered resources and options he had missed when he was paralyzed by fear. He found a peace that allowed him to be fully present with his parents during visits instead of being distracted by worry about the future. Most importantly, Robert's relationship with his parents during their final years together was characterized by love and gratitude rather than fear and guilt. When his father passed away 2 years later, Robert grieved deeply, but without the crushing regret that so many people experience. He knew he had loved well because he had learned to love from the security of being perfectly loved himself. This is what perfect love does in the practical realities of your daily life. It doesn't make your problems disappear, but it gives you the internal resources to handle them with grace, wisdom, and peace. It doesn't guarantee that life will be easy, but it promises that you'll never be without the strength, guidance, and support you need for whatever you're facing. Now, as we begin to wrap up our time together, I want to leave you with something that could be the most important thing you take away from everything we've discussed. Perfect love is not something you have to wait to experience. It's not something you need to qualify for or work up to. It's not reserved for people who have their lives figured out or who have achieved some level of spiritual maturity. Perfect love is available to you right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. With all your fears, all your doubts, all your failures, all your questions. Perfect love isn't waiting for you to get better before it embraces you. It's embracing you right now so that you can get better. The moment you decide to believe this, the moment you choose to anchor your life to this truth rather than to your circumstances or feelings, everything begins to change. Not all at once, necessarily, but change begins immediately, because you're now drawing from a completely different source of strength, security, and hope. You don't have to understand everything about how perfect love works. You don't have to have all your theological questions answered. You don't have to feel deserving or worthy or ready. You just have to be willing to let perfect love be what it already is in your life, your foundation, your security, your source, and your hope. This is your invitation to step out of the prison of fear and into the freedom of perfect love. This is your opportunity to discover what life looks like when you're no longer controlled by what might happen and instead are anchored to what will never change, the absolute, unwavering, perfect love of God for you. The choice is yours, and the choice is now. Fear will tell you to wait until you have more information, more certainty, more proof. Perfect love says you already have everything you need to take the first step toward the freedom you've been longing for. What will you choose? Will you continue to let fear write the story of your life, or will you let perfect love show you what's really possible when you're no longer afraid? The answer to that question will determine not just how you feel tomorrow, but how you live for the rest of your life. But maybe you're sitting there thinking, this all sounds incredible, but I've been disappointed before. I've tried to trust God with my fears, and nothing seemed to change. I've prayed about my anxiety, and it only got worse. How do I know this time will be different? I understand that hesitation completely, and I want to address it head-on, because it might be the very thing standing between you and the breakthrough you've been praying for. When previous attempts to find peace haven't worked, it's usually not because perfect love failed you. It's because you were trying to access perfect love through imperfect methods. Most people approach God's love like it's a vending machine. They put in their prayers, their good behavior, their church attendance, and they expect peace and security to drop out automatically. When it doesn't work that way, they conclude that either God doesn't care or His love isn't powerful enough to handle their specific situation. But perfect love doesn't operate like a transaction. It operates like a relationship. And like any relationship, it deepens through time, attention, and genuine connection. The people who experience the most dramatic transformations from fear to faith aren't necessarily the ones who pray the most eloquent prayers or have the strongest initial belief. They're the ones who learn to abide in perfect love consistently, daily, moment by moment. Let me explain what I mean by abiding, because this concept will revolutionize how you approach your relationship with God's love. Abiding isn't about doing more religious activities or trying harder to feel God's presence. Abiding is about learning to live consciously in the reality that you are completely enveloped by perfect love at every moment of every day. Think about how you breathe. You don't have to think about it, work at it, or convince your lungs to function. Breathing happens automatically because you exist in an atmosphere that sustains life. Abiding in perfect love works similarly. You learn to exist consciously in the atmosphere of God's love, drawing from it naturally and continuously without having to manufacture or maintain the connection through your own efforts. This is where most people get tripped up. They think they have to create or sustain their experience of God's love through spiritual disciplines. But disciplines aren't meant to create the connection. They're meant to help you become aware of the connection that already exists. You don't pray to get God's attention. You pray to give God your attention. You don't read Scripture to earn God's love. You read Scripture to remind yourself of the love you already possess. When you understand this distinction, everything about your spiritual life changes. Instead of approaching God from a place of need, trying to get something from Him, you approach Him from a place of fullness, recognizing what you already have in Him. Instead of begging for His help with your fears, you rest in the truth that His help is already actively working in your situation. This shift from striving to abiding is what transforms people's experience with fear and anxiety. When you're striving, you're still depending on your own efforts to create the security you need. When you're abiding, you're resting in the security that's already been provided for you. The difference in your nervous system's response is profound. I want to tell you about a woman named Patricia who perfectly illustrates this principle. Patricia had struggled with panic attacks for over 15 years. She had tried medication, therapy, meditation, prayer, and every self-help technique she could find. Some things helped temporarily, but the underlying anxiety always returned, often stronger than before. Patricia was frustrated with God because she felt like He wasn't answering her prayers. She would beg Him to take away her anxiety, promise to serve Him better if He would just give her peace, and then feel abandoned when the panic attacks continued. She was exhausting herself trying to earn God's intervention in her situation. Everything changed when Patricia learned the difference between striving for God's love and abiding in it. Instead of approaching God as a desperate petitioner trying to convince Him to help her, she began to approach Him as a beloved daughter, resting in the security of His constant care for her. When she felt a panic attack beginning, instead of fighting it or begging God to stop it, Patricia would do something completely different. She would say, "God, I'm feeling afraid right now, but I know I'm completely safe in your love. I don't understand why I'm experiencing this, but I trust that you're using even this for my good. I'm going to rest in your love for me while I walk through this moment. The shift was subtle, but powerful. Patricia stopped trying to control her anxiety and started resting in God's control over her life. She stopped demanding that God remove her fear and started trusting that God would use her fear to draw her deeper into his love. She stopped measuring God's care for her by whether she felt peaceful and started anchoring her security in God's promises, regardless of how she felt. Within 6 months, Patricia's panic attacks became less frequent and less intense. Within a year, they had virtually disappeared. But more importantly, Patricia had learned something that would serve her for the rest of her life. She had discovered that perfect love isn't about having a problem-free existence. It's about having an unshakable foundation that remains solid regardless of what problems you face. Patricia told me something that has stuck with me ever since. She said, "I spent 15 years trying to get God to fix my anxiety. But God wasn't trying to fix my anxiety. He was trying to fix my understanding of how much He loves me. Once I got that right, the anxiety took care of itself." This is the key insight that could transform your entire approach to fear and worry. God isn't primarily interested in making your life comfortable. He's interested in making your life secure. And there's a huge difference between the two. Comfort depends on external circumstances being favorable. Security depends on knowing that you're held by something stronger than any circumstance you could face. When you chase comfort, you become a slave to your circumstances. When they're good, you feel good. When they're bad, you feel bad. Your emotional and spiritual stability is constantly at the mercy of things you can't control. But when you rest in security, your circumstances become much less relevant to your overall well-being. You can face difficulties with peace and opportunities with wisdom because your foundation isn't dependent on either. This is why some of the most peaceful, confident, and fearless people you'll ever meet are those who have walked through the deepest valleys and discovered that perfect love was with them every step of the way. They're not fearless because nothing bad has ever happened to them. They're fearless because they've learned that perfect love is bigger than anything bad that could happen to them. I want to share something personal with you that illustrates this principle. 5 years ago, I received news that shattered my world. My youngest sister, who was only 28 at the time, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The doctors gave her less than a year to live. In that moment, every fear I thought I had conquered came rushing back with a vengeance. I was terrified of losing her. I was angry at God for allowing this to happen. I was overwhelmed by the helplessness of watching someone I loved suffer while being unable to do anything meaningful to help. All the truths I had been teaching others about perfect love felt distant and theoretical when faced with the possibility of such devastating loss. For weeks, I struggled with doubt, fear, and anger. I questioned everything I believed about God's goodness, His love, and His power. If perfect love was real, why wasn't it protecting my sister? If God really cared about our family, why was He allowing us to go through such agony? The questions tormented me almost as much as the fear itself. But in the middle of that dark season, something profound happened. I realized that I was making the same mistake I had made so many times before. I was measuring God's love by my circumstances instead of measuring my circumstances through the lens of God's love. I was demanding that perfect love prove itself by giving me the outcome I wanted, instead of trusting perfect love to work through whatever outcome occurred. When I made that shift, everything changed. Not the medical situation, which remained serious, but my ability to walk through it with peace instead of panic. I stopped trying to bargain with God for my sister's healing and started trusting God with my sister's life. I stopped demanding explanations for why this was happening and started looking for evidence of God's presence in the middle of it. What I discovered over the following months was something I never could have imagined. Perfect love wasn't absent from our situation. It was woven through every aspect of it. The doctors who cared for my sister with unusual compassion and dedication, the friends who showed up in ways that took my breath away, the strength my sister displayed that inspired everyone around her, the conversations our family had that were deeper and more meaningful than any we'd ever shared, the miracles, both big and small, that reminded us we weren't walking through this alone. My sister's story had a beautiful ending. Against all medical predictions, she not only survived, but thrived. Today, she's healthy, married, and expecting her first child. But that's not the most important part of what I learned during that season. The most important part is that I discovered perfect love wasn't contingent on that happy ending. Perfect love was present and active, regardless of what the outcome might have been. I learned that perfect love doesn't promise to spare you from every difficulty, but it does promise to be with you through every difficulty. It doesn't guarantee that all your stories will have the endings you want, but it does guarantee that all your stories will have endings that ultimately serve your good and God's glory. This understanding changes everything about how you approach the fears that are controlling your life right now. You stop demanding that God remove every threat and start trusting God to be your strength in the face of every threat. You stop insisting that life be predictable and start resting in the truth that God is reliable, even when life isn't. You stop trying to control outcomes and start surrendering to the one who controls everything. Now, I want to address something that might be bothering you as you listen to these stories and principles. You might be thinking, these examples are all about dramatic situations and major life crises, but my fears seem smaller and more mundane. I'm not dealing with cancer or life-threatening situations. I'm just afraid of failure, rejection, financial problems, or being alone. Does perfect love really care about those kinds of everyday anxieties? Let me answer that question with absolute certainty. Perfect love is not just concerned with the big, dramatic moments of your life. Perfect love is intimately involved in every detail of your daily existence. The God who holds galaxies in place also pays attention to the number of hairs on your head. The Creator who sustains the universe is also aware of every worry that keeps you awake at night. Your fears don't have to be life-threatening to be worthy of God's attention. Your anxieties don't have to be dramatic to deserve His care. If something is big enough to steal your peace, it's big enough for God's intervention. If something is important enough to you to cause you distress, it's important enough to Him to address with His perfect love. Think about how a loving parent responds to their child's fears. When a 5-year-old is afraid of monsters under the bed, the parent doesn't dismiss that fear as silly or insignificant. Even though the parent knows there are no actual monsters, they also know the child's fear is real and deserves a compassionate response. The parent provides comfort, reassurance, and security, not because the threat is real, but because the child's distress is real. God responds to your fears with infinitely more wisdom and compassion than even the most loving human parent could provide. He doesn't minimize your anxieties or dismiss your concerns as unworthy of His attention. He sees the pain that fear is causing in your life, and He wants to replace that pain with the peace that comes from knowing you're completely secure in His care. This means that whatever is causing you anxiety right now, no matter how small it might seem compared to other people's problems, is a legitimate concern for perfect love to address. Whether you're worried about a job interview, a difficult conversation, a financial decision, or a relationship issue, perfect love is actively working to provide you with everything you need to handle that situation with grace and wisdom. But here's where understanding perfect love gets practical in ways that most people miss. Perfect love doesn't just comfort you when you're afraid. It also equips you with supernatural resources for handling whatever you're facing. When you're anchored to perfect love, you don't just feel better about your problems. You actually become more capable of solving them. Let me explain what I mean. When you're operating from fear, your brain literally functions differently. Fear triggers your fight-or-flight response, which shuts down the parts of your mind responsible for creativity, problem-solving, and clear thinking. When you're afraid, you make decisions from panic rather than wisdom. You miss opportunities that are right in front of you, and you often create more problems while trying to solve the ones you already have. But when you're resting in perfect love, your nervous system calms down, your mind clears, and you gain access to mental and emotional resources you didn't even know you had. You see solutions you couldn't see before. You think of approaches you never would have considered. You find strength you didn't know you possessed. You make connections you wouldn't have made otherwise. This isn't just psychological or emotional, it's spiritual. When you're aligned with perfect love, you're tapping into divine wisdom, supernatural peace, and heavenly resources that are available to help you navigate earthly challenges. You're not just trying to handle your problems with your own limited abilities. You're accessing the unlimited resources of the one who loves you perfectly. I want to share with you a simple but powerful example of this principle in action. Last month, I received an email from a man named Kevin who had been struggling with fear about his job situation. Kevin worked for a company that was going through layoffs, and he was terrified that he would be next. The fear was consuming his thoughts, affecting his work performance and straining his relationships at home. Kevin had been applying the principles of perfect love we've been discussing, but he was still wrestling with anxiety about his future. Then something shifted. Instead of continuing to focus on his fear of being laid off, Kevin began to focus on perfect love's provision for his life. He started each day by acknowledging that God knew exactly what was happening at his company and had already prepared the perfect path forward for Kevin's career. As Kevin's mind cleared from the fog of fear, he began to see his situation differently. Instead of just hoping to avoid being laid off, he started asking himself what God might want to do through this uncertainty. He began to consider possibilities he had never thought of before. Maybe this was an opportunity to pursue the career change he had been too afraid to make. Maybe this was God's way of moving him towards something better. With this new perspective, Kevin started having conversations with people in his network that he had been too anxious to initiate before. He applied for positions he wouldn't have considered when he was paralyzed by fear. He even started exploring the possibility of starting his own consulting business, something he had dreamed about but never had the courage to pursue. 3 weeks later, Kevin received 2 job offers and a consulting contract that would allow him to work part-time while building his own business. None of these opportunities had existed when he was consumed by fear about losing his current job. They emerged when he shifted from operating out of anxiety to operating out of trust in perfect love's provision. Kevin told me that the most remarkable thing about the experience wasn't just that everything worked out better than he had hoped. It was that he discovered he had capabilities and connections he never would have accessed if he had remained paralyzed by fear. Perfect love didn't just solve his problem. It revealed resources within him and around him that transformed what had looked like a crisis into an opportunity for growth and advancement. This is what perfect love wants to do in whatever situation is causing you fear right now. It wants to give you not just comfort in the face of your challenges, but supernatural resources for transforming those challenges into opportunities. It wants to show you solutions you can't see from a place of fear and open doors you didn't even know existed. But accessing these resources requires something that goes against every instinct fear has taught you. It requires you to stop trying to figure everything out on your own and start asking perfect love to show you what you're missing. It requires you to stop focusing on what could go wrong and start looking for what God might be preparing to do right. It requires you to stop operating from scarcity and start operating from the abundance that perfect love provides. This shift in perspective is what separates people who are controlled by their circumstances from people who are empowered to influence their circumstances. When you know you're perfectly loved, you stop being a victim of whatever happens to you and start being a participant in what God wants to do through you. Now, I want to give you something practical that you can start using immediately. I call it the Perfect Love Reset, and it's a simple 3-step process you can use anytime fear starts to overwhelm you. This isn't just a coping mechanism or a temporary fix. It's a way of retraining your mind and heart to run to perfect love instead of running to panic when life gets uncertain. Step 1 is what I call the pause. When you feel fear starting to rise, when anxiety begins to grip your heart, when worry threatens to take over your thoughts, you stop everything and take a deep breath. You don't try to fight the fear or push it away. You simply acknowledge it and pause before reacting to it. In that pause, you say something like this: I notice that I'm feeling afraid right now. That's okay. Fear is just information that something feels uncertain or threatening. But I don't have to be controlled by this feeling. I have access to something bigger than my fear, and I'm going to choose to run to perfect love instead of running to panic. Step 2 is what I call the reminder. In this step, you deliberately remind yourself of what's true about perfect love, regardless of what your emotions are telling you in the moment. You might say something like, perfect love surrounds me right now. I'm completely known and completely loved. Someone with unlimited power is actively working for my good in this situation. I have access to divine wisdom for whatever decision I need to make. I am not alone, I am not abandoned, and I am not without resources. The key to this step is that you're not trying to talk yourself into feeling better. You're anchoring your mind to truth that exists independently of your feelings. You're choosing to believe what's real about perfect love rather than what feels real about your circumstances. Step 3 is what I call the surrender. This is where you take whatever you're afraid of and you consciously place it into the hands of perfect love. You might pray something like, God, I'm afraid about this situation, but I'm choosing to trust you with it. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I know you do. I don't have the power to control this outcome, but I know you do. I'm surrendering my need to figure this out on my own, and I'm asking you to handle it according to your perfect love and wisdom. This surrender isn't about becoming passive or irresponsible. It's about releasing the crushing burden of trying to control outcomes that are beyond your control, while remaining actively engaged in doing what you can do with peace instead of panic. When you practice these 3 steps consistently, something remarkable begins to happen. The time between feeling fear and remembering perfect love gets shorter and shorter. The intensity of your emotional reactions to uncertainty decreases. The peace that comes from knowing you're held by perfect love becomes more natural and accessible to you. But here's what I want you to understand about this process. It's not a magic formula that instantly eliminates every anxious thought or fearful feeling. It's a way of training your heart and mind to respond to uncertainty from a place of security rather than from a place of panic. Like any training, it takes practice, consistency, and patience with yourself as you learn. Some days, you'll remember to use these steps immediately when fear arises, and you'll experience quick relief and clarity. Other days, you might not remember until you've already been anxious for hours, and that's okay too. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Every time you choose to run to perfect love, instead of staying trapped in fear, you're strengthening your capacity to live from security rather than from anxiety. I want to close our time together by addressing something that might be on your heart right now. Maybe you're thinking, this all sounds wonderful, and I want to believe it's true, but I've been afraid for so long that I don't know if I can really change. What if I'm too broken, too damaged, too set in my ways to experience this kind of transformation? Let me tell you something that could change your life. Perfect love specializes in transforming people who think they're too far gone for transformation. Perfect love is drawn to broken hearts, not repelled by them. Perfect love sees your wounds as opportunities for healing, your fears as invitations for courage, your weaknesses as places where his strength can be displayed most powerfully. The very fact that you're listening to this message right now is evidence that perfect love is already at work in your life. Something drew you here, something made you hungry for freedom from fear, something gave you hope that change might be possible. That something was perfect love calling to your heart, inviting you to discover what life looks like when you're no longer controlled by what might happen and instead are anchored to what will never change. You are not too broken for perfect love. You are not too afraid for perfect love. You are not too damaged, too old, too set in your ways, or too far gone for perfect love. Perfect love has been waiting for this moment, this invitation, this opportunity to show you what's possible when you stop trying to be strong enough for your problems and start resting in the truth that perfect love is strong enough for anything you could ever face. The journey from fear to faith doesn't require you to be perfect. It only requires you to be willing. Willing to believe that you're more loved than you've ever imagined. Willing to trust that you're safer than your circumstances suggest. Willing to hope that your future is in better hands than your own. This is your moment. This is your invitation. This is perfect love extending its hand to you and saying, you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. You don't have to figure everything out by yourself. You don't have to be strong enough for whatever comes next. I am strong enough, and I am with you. Well, what will you choose? Will you continue to let fear write the story of your life, or will you step into the adventure of discovering what becomes possible when you're anchored to perfect love? The choice you make in this moment could be the beginning of the most transformative season of your entire life. Perfect love is waiting. Perfect love is calling. Perfect love is ready to show you what you've been searching for all along. The question isn't whether perfect love is real or whether it's powerful enough to handle your situation. The question is whether you're ready to let perfect love be what it already is in your life, your foundation, your security, your source, and your hope. Your breakthrough is not in some distant future. Your freedom is not dependent on your circumstances changing. Your peace is not waiting for you to become someone different. Everything you need is available right now, in this moment, through perfect love. The only thing standing between you and the life you've been longing for is your willingness to receive what's already been given to you. This is where fear loses its power over you. Not because you become brave enough to face it, but because you discover something so much greater than fear, that fear simply has no authority in your life anymore. This is where anxiety releases its grip on your heart. Not because your problems disappear, but because you find a security that no problem can touch. This is where worry stops stealing your sleep and peace becomes your natural state. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you learn to rest in the arms of someone who is absolutely reliable, even when life isn't. This is where you stop being controlled by what might happen and start being empowered by what you know is true. You are perfectly loved. You are completely secure. You are divinely provided for. You are supernaturally equipped. You are eternally safe. This is not wishful thinking or positive psychology. This is the bedrock reality that perfect love offers to anyone willing to receive it. The transformation begins now. The healing starts today. The freedom you've been searching for is not only possible, it's inevitable when you anchor your life to perfect love instead of to your fears. Everything you need for the journey ahead has already been provided. Everything you need to know for the next step has already been revealed. Everything you need to be free from fear has already been given to you. The invitation is before you right now, and it's not complicated. You don't need to understand every theological detail or have all your questions answered before you can begin experiencing this transformation. You don't need to reach some level of spiritual maturity or emotional stability. Perfect love meets you exactly where you are, with all your doubts, all your struggles, all your imperfections, and says, "This is where we start." I want to tell you about a moment that happened just 3 months ago that perfectly captures what I'm talking about. I was speaking at a conference, and afterward, a woman approached me with tears streaming down her face. She said, "I've been a Christian for 30 years, but I've never felt safe. I've never felt like God actually liked me, even though I knew He loved me. I've been afraid of disappointing Him, afraid of not being good enough, afraid that if I really let my guard down, He would see who I really am and turn away." This woman had spent 3 decades trying to earn something that was already hers. She had exhausted herself, attempting to become worthy of a love that had never been conditional in the first place. She was living like an orphan when she was actually a beloved daughter, behaving like a stranger when she was actually family. But something shifted in her heart that day. Not because she learned new information or had a dramatic emotional experience, but because she finally understood that perfect love had been pursuing her all along. She wasn't chasing after God's approval. He was chasing after her heart. She wasn't trying to convince Him to love her. He was trying to convince her to receive the love He had already given. 6 months later, this same woman sent me a message that brought tears to my eyes. She said, "I wake up every morning now with a peace I didn't know was possible, not because my life got easier, but because I finally understand that I'm held by something stronger than any difficulty I could face. I'm not afraid of disappointing God anymore because I know His love for me isn't based on my performance. I'm not afraid of the future because I know whose hands my future is in." This is what happens when you stop trying to earn perfect love and start receiving it. This is the transformation that's available to you right now, not as a reward for getting your life together, but as a gift that will help you get your life together. Perfect love doesn't wait for you to be ready. Perfect love makes you ready. But let me address something that might be creating resistance in your heart right now. Maybe you're thinking, "I've heard all this before. I've been to church, I've read the Bible, I've prayed the prayers, but nothing has really changed in how I feel or how I handle fear. Why should this time be any different?" That's a fair question, and I want to answer it honestly. The difference isn't in the message itself, because the truth about God's love has never changed. The difference is in how you receive and apply that truth. Most people treat God's love like information to be learned rather than like a reality to be lived in. They study it, discuss it, even teach it to others, but they never learn to actually rest in it when life gets overwhelming. Think about the difference between knowing about swimming and actually getting in the water. You can read every book about swimming techniques, watch every instructional video, understand the physics of buoyancy and the mechanics of different strokes. But until you actually get in the water and trust it to hold you up, all that knowledge remains theoretical. Perfect love works the same way. You can know everything the Bible says about God's love for you, memorize every verse about His care and protection, understand every theological concept about His grace and mercy. But until you actually begin living as if those truths are more real than your circumstances, they remain just beautiful ideas rather than life-changing realities. The shift happens when you move from knowing about perfect love to abiding in perfect love. When you stop treating it like a doctrine to believe and start treating it like an atmosphere to breathe. When you stop approaching it like a subject to study and start approaching it like a relationship to enjoy. This is why the same truth that has left some people unchanged has completely transformed others. It's not because God loves some people more than others, or because some people are more deserving of His attention. It's because some people have learned to live consciously in the reality of His love, while others are still trying to earn or understand it. Let me share with you a simple but profound shift that could change everything about how you experience God's love. Instead of asking, "How can I get God to love me more?" Start asking, how can I become more aware of how much God already loves me? Instead of wondering, what do I need to do to earn God's protection? Start wondering, how can I rest more fully in the protection that's already surrounding me? The questions you ask determine the answers you receive. When you ask questions that assume you need to earn God's love, you'll spend your energy trying to perform for Him. When you ask questions that assume His love is already yours, you'll spend your energy learning to receive and enjoy what He's already given you. This shift in questioning reveals something crucial about the nature of perfect love. It's not a reward for good behavior or a prize for spiritual achievement. It's the foundation that makes good behavior possible and the security that makes spiritual growth natural. You don't love God in order to be loved by Him. You love God because you are already loved by Him. When you really understand this, everything about your relationship with fear changes. You stop being afraid of disappointing God because you know His love for you isn't based on your performance. You stop being afraid of not being good enough because you know His acceptance of you isn't conditional on your goodness. You stop being afraid of being abandoned because you know His commitment to you is based on His character, not your worthiness. I want to tell you about a man named Michael who discovered this truth in the most unexpected way. Michael had struggled with perfectionism his entire life. He was terrified of making mistakes, failing to meet expectations, or being seen as inadequate in any way. This fear drove him to work obsessively, constantly second-guess himself, and avoid taking risks that might expose his limitations. Michael's perfectionism extended to his spiritual life as well. He believed that God's love and blessing were somehow connected to his ability to live up to divine standards. When he succeeded at being good, he felt close to God. When he failed or struggled, he felt distant from God. His relationship with perfect love was actually being controlled by his imperfections. Everything changed for Michael during a season when his life fell apart in ways he couldn't control or fix. He lost his job due to company downsizing. His marriage went through a crisis that threatened to end in divorce. His teenage son was arrested for drug possession. In the span of 6 months, every area where Michael had tried to maintain perfect control collapsed simultaneously. For the first time in his adult life, Michael couldn't pretend he had everything together. He couldn't perform his way out of his problems or work harder to fix what was broken. He was forced to face the reality that he was not in control of his life, had never been in control of his life, and could not earn his way back to stability through perfect behavior. In that place of complete helplessness, something beautiful happened. Michael discovered that God's love for him was not diminished by his inability to be perfect. In fact, it was in his weakness that he experienced perfect love most powerfully. When he had nothing to offer God except his brokenness, he discovered that his brokenness was exactly what God wanted to heal. Michael told me later that losing everything he thought he needed to be loved by God was actually the beginning of understanding how much God already loved him. When he couldn't perform, he learned to receive. When he couldn't earn, he learned to rest. When he couldn't control, he learned to trust. Today, Michael's life looks very different than it did during that crisis season. His marriage was restored and is stronger than it ever was before. He found a new career that's more fulfilling than his previous job. His relationship with his son has been transformed. But Michael will tell you that the most important change wasn't in his circumstances. It was in his understanding of perfect love. Michael no longer lives in fear of not being good enough, because he knows perfect love isn't attracted to his goodness. It's committed to his growth. He no longer panics when things don't go according to his plans, because he knows perfect love is working through his circumstances, not just in spite of them. He no longer exhausts himself trying to control outcomes, because he knows perfect love is in control of outcomes in ways that are far better than anything he could orchestrate. This is what I want you to understand about your own journey with fear. The goal isn't to become perfect enough that you never have reason to be afraid. The goal is to become so secure in perfect love that fear loses its power to control you, even when you have every human reason to be concerned. Perfect love doesn't promise you a life without challenges, but it does promise you a heart at peace in the middle of challenges. It doesn't guarantee that everything will go according to your plans, but it does guarantee that everything will work according to God's plans for your ultimate good. It doesn't ensure that you'll never feel afraid, but it does ensure that you'll never be alone in your fear. Now let me share with you something that could revolutionize how you think about the fears that are controlling your life right now. Every fear you experience is actually an invitation from perfect love to go deeper in your relationship with Him. Instead of seeing your fears as evidence that God's love isn't working in your life, you can begin to see them as opportunities to discover just how powerful and reliable His love actually is. Think about it this way. A muscle only grows stronger when it encounters resistance. A foundation only proves its strength when it's tested by storms. Faith only deepens when it's challenged by circumstances that require you to trust what you cannot see. Your fears aren't obstacles to experiencing perfect love. They're the very context in which perfect love wants to demonstrate its power in your life. This completely changes how you relate to the anxieties and worries that have been tormenting you. Instead of seeing them as evidence that you're failing spiritually, you can begin to see them as opportunities to experience God's faithfulness in new ways. Instead of being ashamed of your fears, you can bring them boldly to perfect love, knowing that each one is a chance for God to prove His care for you. I learned this lesson in a very personal way about 18 months ago. I was facing a situation that triggered every insecurity I thought I had overcome. A business partnership I had invested years building was falling apart due to my partner's dishonesty. Not only was I facing significant financial loss, but I was also dealing with the betrayal of someone I had trusted completely. The fear was overwhelming. I was afraid of financial ruin, afraid of having to start over professionally, afraid of being seen as naive or foolish for trusting the wrong person. Every worst-case scenario played on repeat in my mind. I found myself questioning everything I had taught others about perfect love, wondering if I was just naive to believe that God really cared about the details of my daily life. But then I remembered something crucial. This wasn't happening to me despite God's love. This was happening within the context of God's love. Perfect love hadn't abandoned me or failed to protect me. Perfect love was present in this situation, working in ways I couldn't yet see or understand. Instead of seeing my fear as evidence that perfect love wasn't real, I began to see it as an invitation to discover just how real perfect love actually was. Instead of interpreting my circumstances as proof that God didn't care about me, I began to look for evidence of His care that I might be missing because I was so focused on what was going wrong. The transformation in my perspective was gradual but profound. I started noticing things I had been too panicked to see before, doors opening that I hadn't even knocked on, people coming into my life with exactly the resources and wisdom I needed, opportunities emerging that were actually better than what I was afraid of losing. Within 6 months, what had looked like a devastating setback had become the foundation for the most successful and fulfilling season of my career. The business partnership that ended in betrayal was replaced by collaborations that were healthier and more profitable. The financial loss that had terrified me was recovered in ways I never could have planned or predicted. But here's the most important part of that story. The breakthrough didn't come because I figured out how to fix my problems. It came because I learned to see my problems as the context in which perfect love wanted to work, not as evidence that perfect love had failed me. Every fear you're facing right now is actually an opportunity for perfect love to prove itself in your life. Every anxiety that's stealing your sleep is an invitation for perfect love to demonstrate its ability to give you rest. Every worry that's consuming your thoughts is a chance for perfect love to show you what it looks like to cast all your cares on someone who cares for you completely. But accessing this perspective requires something that goes against every instinct fear has trained into you. It requires you to stop seeing your circumstances as the ultimate reality and start seeing perfect love as the ultimate reality that's working through your circumstances. When you make this shift, something remarkable happens to your emotional and spiritual resilience. You stop being at the mercy of whatever happens to you and start being anchored to someone who is bigger than anything that could happen to you. You stop measuring God's goodness by your circumstances and start interpreting your circumstances through the lens of God's goodness. This doesn't mean you become passive or irresponsible about the real challenges in your life. It means you engage with those challenges from a completely different foundation. Instead of operating from fear about what might happen, you operate from trust in what you know is true about perfect love. Instead of being driven by anxiety to control outcomes, you're guided by wisdom to take right actions and trust God with results. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Imagine you're facing a financial crisis that's causing you tremendous anxiety. From a fear-based perspective, you might panic about all the terrible things that could happen, work yourself into exhaustion trying to solve the problem, or make desperate decisions that actually make the situation worse. But from a perfect love perspective, you would approach the same situation completely differently. You would acknowledge the real challenge without being overwhelmed by it. You would take appropriate actions without being driven by desperation. You would ask for wisdom without demanding immediate solutions. You would work diligently without carrying the crushing weight of feeling responsible for outcomes beyond your control. The difference isn't in the external circumstances. The difference is in the internal foundation from which you're responding to those circumstances. When you're anchored to perfect love, you have access to peace, wisdom, and strength that aren't dependent on your situation being comfortable or predictable. This is why some people can face devastating circumstances with remarkable grace, while others are overwhelmed by relatively minor challenges. It's not because some people are naturally stronger or more capable. It's because some people have learned to draw from a source of strength that's independent of their circumstances, while others are trying to generate strength from within themselves. Perfect love offers you access to supernatural resources for handling natural challenges, divine wisdom for making human decisions, heavenly peace for earthly troubles, eternal security for temporal uncertainties. These resources aren't reserved for special people or dramatic situations. They're available to anyone who learns to live consciously in the reality of being perfectly loved. Now, as we near the end of our time together, I want to address something that might be stirring in your heart. Maybe you're feeling a sense of hope you haven't experienced in a long time. Maybe you're beginning to believe that the freedom from fear you've been longing for might actually be possible. Maybe you're sensing that perfect love is not just a beautiful concept, but a living reality that wants to transform every area of your life where fear has been holding you captive. If that's what you're feeling, I want you to know that those stirrings in your heart are not wishful thinking or emotional manipulation. They're the result of perfect love calling to your spirit, inviting you to step out of the prison of fear and into the freedom that's been waiting for you all along. But I also want to prepare you for something important. The moment you begin to seriously consider living from perfect love instead of from fear, you're going to encounter resistance, not from God, who is delighted by your willingness to receive what He's been trying to give you, but from the enemy of your soul, who knows that your transformation from fear to faith will not only change your life, but will also impact everyone around you. Fear wants to keep you isolated, paralyzed, and convinced that you're alone in your struggles. Perfect love wants to set you free, empower you, and remind you that you're completely surrounded by divine care and protection. The battle between these two realities is not just philosophical. It's intensely personal and profoundly practical. When you begin to live from perfect love, fear will try to convince you that you're being naive, irresponsible, or setting yourself up for disappointment. When you start trusting God with your concerns instead of trying to control them yourself, anxiety will whisper that you're being passive and that terrible things will happen if you don't stay vigilant. This resistance is normal, predictable, and actually a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Every person who has ever experienced genuine transformation from fear to faith has had to walk through this season of choosing what to believe when their emotions and circumstances seem to contradict the truth about perfect love. The key to navigating this resistance is understanding that it's temporary. Fear makes a lot of noise when it's losing its grip on your life, but that noise doesn't mean it's getting stronger. It means it's getting desperate. Like a bully who becomes more aggressive when people stop being intimidated, fear becomes more intense when you stop being controlled by it. During this transition period, you'll need to make a daily, sometimes moment-by-moment choice to anchor your life to what you know is true about perfect love, rather than to what you feel in the moment about your circumstances. This isn't about denying reality or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about recognizing that there's a deeper reality than what you can see with your physical eyes or feel with your human emotions. The deeper reality is that you are completely known, utterly loved, divinely protected, and eternally secure in the heart of God. This reality doesn't change based on your feelings, your circumstances, your performance, or your understanding. It simply is, as constant and reliable as God Himself. When you build your life on this foundation, everything else begins to shift. Not immediately, not without challenges, but inevitably. Because perfect love is not just a comforting idea, it's the most powerful force in the universe, and it's actively working in your life right now to transform you from the inside out. Your journey from fear to faith begins with a single decision. Not a decision to never be afraid again, because that's not realistic or even necessary, but a decision to run to perfect love instead of to panic when fear tries to overwhelm you. A decision to trust what you know about God's character instead of being controlled by what you don't know about your future. This decision doesn't require you to have all the answers or to feel completely confident. It just requires you to be willing to believe that you're more loved than you've ever imagined, willing to trust that you're safer than your circumstances suggest, willing to hope that your best days are ahead of you, not behind you. Perfect love has been waiting for this moment, waiting for you to discover that the security you've been searching for has been surrounding you all along, waiting for you to realize that the strength you've been trying to generate from within yourself has been available from an unlimited source, waiting for you to understand that the peace you've been chasing through controlling your circumstances has been offered to you as a gift that no circumstance can touch. The invitation is before you now, not to become someone different, but to become who you already are in the eyes of perfect love, not to earn something you don't deserve, but to receive something that's already been given to you. Not to prove that you're worthy of being loved, but to rest in the truth that you're already perfectly loved. This moment right here is your turning point. Everything we've talked about, every truth we've explored, every story we've shared, has been leading to this single choice that will determine the trajectory of your life from this day forward. You see, perfect love isn't just waiting for you to feel ready or to have enough faith or to overcome all your doubts. Perfect love is waiting for you to say yes. Yes to being held when you can't hold yourself together. Yes to being guided when you can't see the path ahead. Yes to being loved with a love so complete, so unchanging, so absolutely reliable that it becomes the unshakable foundation upon which you build everything else. I want you to understand something profound about this moment. Your willingness to receive perfect love isn't just about you. When you step out of fear and into the security of being perfectly loved, you become a living demonstration of what's possible for everyone around you who is still trapped in anxiety and worry. Think about the people in your life who are struggling with their own fears right now. Your spouse who lies awake, worrying about the future. Your children who are anxious about fitting in or succeeding. Your friends who are paralyzed by decisions they need to make. Your co-workers who are stressed about job security. Your family members who are overwhelmed by circumstances they can't control. When you learn to live from perfect love instead of from fear, you don't just change your own life. You become a source of peace in a world full of panic. You become a voice of hope in conversations dominated by despair. You become living proof that there's another way to navigate life's uncertainties besides being controlled by them. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically, and it doesn't happen overnight. Like everything worthwhile in life, it requires intentionality, consistency, and patience with yourself as you learn new patterns of thinking and responding. Let me give you a roadmap for the journey ahead, because knowing what to expect can make all the difference between giving up when things get challenging and persevering until you experience the breakthrough you're looking for. The first phase of your transformation will be what I call the awakening. This is where you are right now. You're becoming aware that there's something bigger than your fears, something more reliable than your circumstances, something more powerful than your problems. You're beginning to believe that perfect love might actually be real and available to you personally. During this phase, you'll likely experience moments of genuine hope mixed with periods of doubt. You'll have glimpses of what peace feels like, followed by times when anxiety returns with a vengeance. This is completely normal. You're not failing when this happens. You're learning. Your heart and mind are being retrained after years of operating from fear, and that process takes time. The key during this phase is to be patient with yourself while remaining committed to the truth you're discovering. When fear tries to convince you that perfect love is too good to be true, remind yourself of everything we've discussed. When circumstances seem to contradict what you're learning about God's care for you, choose to interpret those circumstances through the lens of perfect love, rather than the other way around. The second phase is what I call the testing. This is when life will present you with opportunities to apply what you're learning about perfect love in real, challenging situations. You might face a health scare that triggers your fear of mortality. You might encounter financial pressure that activates your anxiety about provision. You might experience relationship conflict that awakens your fear of rejection or abandonment. These situations aren't punishments or signs that perfect love isn't working in your life. They're classrooms where you get to discover just how strong and reliable perfect love actually is. They're opportunities to move from theoretical knowledge to experiential wisdom, from head knowledge to heart knowledge. During this phase, you'll be tempted to fall back into old patterns of panic and control. That's when you'll need to remember the three-step process we discussed: the reality check, the trust transfer, and the gratitude shift. You'll need to practice running to perfect love instead of running to worry when life gets overwhelming. The third phase is what I call the establishment. This is when living from perfect love becomes more natural than living from fear. This is when your first instinct in challenging situations is to remember whose you are, rather than to panic about what might happen. This is when the peace that comes from being perfectly loved becomes your normal state, rather than something you have to work to achieve. In this phase, you'll find yourself becoming a source of stability for others who are still controlled by their fears. People will start commenting on your peace, asking about your confidence, wondering how you stay so calm in situations that would overwhelm most people. You'll have opportunities to share what you've learned about perfect love, not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who has discovered where to run when you don't have it all figured out. But here's something crucial I need to tell you about this journey. Each phase isn't a destination you arrive at and then stay in permanently. Life has a way of presenting new challenges that require you to go deeper in your understanding and experience of perfect love. What feels like going backwards is often actually going deeper. You might find yourself in situations that trigger fears you thought you had overcome. You might face uncertainties that challenge your trust in ways you hadn't experienced before. When this happens, don't interpret it as failure or regression. Interpret it as an invitation from perfect love to discover even more of its power and reliability in your life. I want to share with you something that happened to me just 6 months ago that perfectly illustrates this principle. I thought I had learned everything I needed to know about trusting God with my fears. I had been teaching these principles for years, had seen them work in countless situations, and felt confident in my ability to live from perfect love rather than from anxiety. Then I received a phone call that shattered my sense of security. My doctor told me that some routine test results showed abnormalities that needed immediate investigation. The possibility of a serious diagnosis sent me into a spiral of fear that I hadn't experienced in years. All my teaching about perfect love felt distant and theoretical when faced with the possibility of my own mortality. For several days, I struggled with embarrassment about my fear, wondering how I could help others overcome anxiety when I was clearly still vulnerable to it myself. But then I realized something important. My fear wasn't evidence that perfect love had failed me or that I hadn't learned anything about trusting God. My fear was an opportunity to go deeper than I had ever gone before in my relationship with perfect love. Instead of being ashamed of my anxiety, I brought it honestly to God. Instead of trying to generate faith through willpower, I rested in the truth that perfect love was holding me even when I couldn't feel it. Instead of demanding immediate answers about my health, I chose to trust that whatever the results showed, I would not face them alone. The test results turned out to be a false alarm, but that's not the most important part of the story. The most important part is what I learned about perfect love during those weeks of uncertainty. I discovered that perfect love doesn't just sustain you through the fears you've already overcome. It meets you in brand new fears with the same power and faithfulness you've experienced before. This experience reminded me that the journey with perfect love isn't about reaching a place where you never feel afraid again. It's about having a relationship with someone who is bigger than any fear you could ever face, no matter how new or unexpected that fear might be. So, as you begin this journey, I want you to have realistic expectations. There will be times when you feel like you're making tremendous progress, and there will be times when you feel like you're back at square one. There will be moments when perfect love feels more real than anything else in your world, and there will be moments when it feels distant and theoretical. All of this is part of the process. All of this is normal. All of this is leading you deeper into the security and freedom that perfect love offers. The key is to keep choosing truth over feelings, to keep running to love instead of to panic, to keep trusting what you know about God's character instead of being controlled by what you don't know about your circumstances. Now, let me give you some practical tools that will help you navigate this journey successfully. These aren't magic formulas or guaranteed shortcuts, but they are tried and tested ways of training your heart and mind to live from perfect love instead of from fear. The first tool is what I call daily declarations. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you think about your schedule, before you allow the concerns of the day to flood your mind, you spend 5 minutes declaring what's true about perfect love in your life. You might say something like, I am perfectly loved by the Creator of the universe. I'm completely safe in His care. I am divinely guided in every decision I need to make today. I am supernaturally equipped for every challenge I might face. I am eternally secure, regardless of what happens in my temporary circumstances. The power of this practice isn't in the words themselves, though the words matter. The power is in training your mind to start each day anchored to truth rather than to worry. You're literally rewiring your brain to default to perfect love instead of to fear. The second tool is what I call the evening review. Before you go to sleep each night, you spend a few minutes reflecting on how you saw perfect love at work in your day. Maybe it was a conversation that went better than you expected. Maybe it was a problem that resolved itself in an unexpected way. Maybe it was simply the strength you had to get through a difficult situation. The goal isn't to find dramatic miracles or supernatural interventions, though those certainly count when they happen. The goal is to train your eyes to see the countless ways perfect love is actively caring for you every single day. When you make this a habit, you'll be amazed at how much evidence of God's care you've been missing simply because you weren't paying attention. The third tool is what I call fear journaling. When you encounter a fear that feels overwhelming, instead of trying to push it away or pretend it doesn't exist, you write it down. But you don't just write down the fear, you also write down what perfect love says about that specific situation. For example, if you're afraid of losing your job, you might write, "I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job and won't be able to provide for my family. But perfect love says that God knows my needs and has never failed to provide for those who trust in Him. Perfect love says that even if I lost this job, God would open doors I can't even imagine right now." This practice helps you see your fears clearly instead of being overwhelmed by them. And it also helps you apply the truth about perfect love to your specific situations instead of keeping it abstract and theoretical. The fourth tool is what I call the gratitude inventory. Once a week, you make a list of everything you're grateful for, but you approach it strategically. You divide your list into 3 categories. Things perfect love has provided, things perfect love has protected you from, and things perfect love has prepared for your future. This exercise serves multiple purposes. It trains your heart in gratitude, which is one of the most powerful antidotes to fear and anxiety. It helps you recognize God's active involvement in your life. And it builds your confidence in perfect love's ability to handle whatever challenges lie ahead. The fifth and final tool is what I call community connection. You find at least one other person who is also learning to live from perfect love instead of from fear, and you commit to encouraging each other in this journey. This might be a spouse, a friend, a family member, or someone you meet in a small group or online community. The purpose of this connection isn't to have someone fix your problems or talk you out of your fears. The purpose is to have someone who can remind you of truth when you're struggling to remember it yourself, someone who can pray with you when you're facing challenges, and someone who can celebrate with you as you experience breakthroughs. These 5 tools, practiced consistently, will accelerate your transformation from fear to faith in ways that will surprise you. But remember, they're tools, not rules. Use them as they're helpful, adapt them to fit your personality and schedule, and don't let them become another source of pressure or guilt in your life. The goal is progress, not perfection. The goal is growth, not graduation. The goal is learning to run to perfect love more quickly and consistently when life gets overwhelming, not never feeling overwhelmed in the first place. As we come to the close of our time together, I want to share with you one final story that captures the heart of everything we've been discussing. This story comes from a letter I received just 2 weeks ago from a woman named Grace, and it perfectly illustrates what becomes possible when someone makes the journey from fear to faith. Grace wrote to me about her experience over the past year since she first learned about the practical reality of perfect love. She said that 12 months ago, she was controlled by so many fears that she barely left her house except for work and essential errands. She was afraid of driving on highways, afraid of flying, afraid of meeting new people, afraid of trying new things, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being judged, afraid of being alone, and afraid of being with others. Her life had become incredibly small and confined. She turned down job opportunities that required travel, She avoided social gatherings. She said no to invitations that might put her in unfamiliar situations. She was existing rather than living, surviving rather than thriving. But something began to change when Grace started applying the principles we've discussed in this video. She began each day by reminding herself that she was perfectly loved and completely safe in God's care. When fears would arise throughout the day, she practiced the three-step process of pausing, remembering truth, and surrendering her concerns to perfect love. At first, Grace said, the changes were subtle. She found herself sleeping a little better. She felt slightly less anxious in social situations. She noticed that she wasn't catastrophizing about every decision quite as much as before. But as she continued to practice living from perfect love instead of from fear, the changes became more dramatic. 6 months into her journey, Grace accepted a job promotion that required her to give presentations to large groups of people, something that would have been unthinkable for her a year earlier. 8 months in, she took her first vacation in over 5 years, including a flight to another state. 10 months in, she started dating again after being single for 3 years because she had been too afraid of being hurt or rejected. But Grace said the most remarkable change wasn't in what she was doing differently. It was in who she was becoming. She described feeling like she was finally living as her true self instead of as a fearful version of herself. She talked about experiencing joy and peace and confidence that she had forgotten were possible. Grace ended her letter with something that brought tears to my eyes. She said, I used to think that courage meant not being afraid. Now I understand that courage means being perfectly loved. When you know you're held by someone who is bigger than anything you could face, you can walk into any situation with peace. Not because you know how things will turn out, but because you know whose hands they're in. This is what I want for you. Not a life without challenges or uncertainties, but a life where challenges and uncertainties don't have the power to control you anymore. Not a guarantee that everything will go according to your plans, but the security of knowing that everything is in the hands of someone whose plans for you are better than anything you could design for yourself. The journey begins now. The transformation starts today. The freedom you've been searching for is not only possible, it's inevitable when you anchor your life to perfect love instead of to your fears. Perfect love is calling your name right now. Perfect love is extending its hand to you in this very moment. Perfect love is ready to show you what life looks like when you're no longer controlled by what might happen, and instead are anchored to what will never change. The invitation is simple, but it's also profound. Will you let perfect love be what it already is in your life? Will you receive what's already been given to you? Will you rest in the truth that you are completely known, utterly loved, divinely protected, and eternally secure? Your answer to that question will determine not just how you feel tomorrow, but how you live for the rest of your life. Perfect love is waiting. Perfect love is calling. Perfect love is ready to transform every area of your life where fear has been holding you captive. This is your moment. This is your opportunity. This is your invitation to step out of the prison of fear and into the freedom that's been waiting for you all along. What will you choose? I believe you're going to choose perfect love. I believe you're going to discover what millions of people throughout history have discovered, that when you're anchored to something bigger than your fears, those fears lose their power to control your life. When you know you're perfectly loved, you can face anything with courage, handle anything with grace, and trust that your story is being written by hands that are far more capable than your own. You are safe here. You are loved here. You are home here. And from this place of perfect security, you can live the life of freedom, purpose, and joy that perfect love has always intended for you. The journey begins now. Perfect love is ready when you are.